This video is sponsored by Ridge. More on them later. Some people say that there's no such thing as a completely bad idea. Even misconceived concepts can be reworked and refashioned into something that is worth sharing with people who now won't laugh at you. But from my perspective, the very idea of rebooting a game franchise is a big, awkward pill to swallow. That's actually a better metaphor than I intended, because sometimes you need medication to make you better, and there are definitely franchises out there that are in dire need of a reboot, but sometimes games get new games that try to take things in a bold new direction and just end up being not so great. I'm not here to question the validity and necessity of a reboot for the most part. I just want to see how misguided we can go with an attempt to kickstart a franchise that did not work in any way. It's one big video of actually bad ideas. Hopefully I don't add to them.
If I'm talking about bad reboots, is that a way of rewarding their failures by talking about them and keeping them relevant in a video that's basically me pointing and laughing at a bunch of bad ideas? That's entirely possible, not really what I'm trying to do here, so I think we need to take a moment to inject some more positivity into this video and maybe one or two kind of really good ideas, such as a sleek and stylish front pocket wallet that is so incredibly sturdy that it can laugh off an attack from a chainsaw. And you know, wallets aren't supposed to do that, but the Ridge wallet does it anyway. I know a few reboots that need some time with a chainsaw.
It might be encouraging to hear that I was once like you. I used to own a chunky leather wallet that made it look like my Brazilian butt lift had gone horribly wrong, but one day I saw the light and was saved by Ridge, who were kind enough to sponsor today's video with their incredibly sturdy wallets that are available in more than 30 colours and can hold up to 12 cards that you can now carry around in your front pocket with a bit of style. Plus, Ridge were also kind enough to send me their waterproof commuter backpack with a shock-resistant laptop holder, and their larger Weekender duffel bag, which both have an external USB port for on-the-go charging, and when the world stops being on fire, I'm gonna be using these a lot. Ridge comes with a lifetime warranty, so you can buy one wallet for the rest of your life if you so wish, with a 45-day return window for a free refund if you're not such a fan. Get 10% off today with free worldwide shipping and returns by going to ridge.com/RabbidLuigi and using the code RabbidLuigi. It's time to move your wallet into the future.
Okay then, let's put our shoes on again badly. Is that what that means? Typically, you'd expect a reboot to come out sometime after the previous game in a franchise. If that gap is large enough, you may have a hard time knitting two games together that were made in completely different eras, in which case drawing a line under one and starting virtually afresh with another is generally a good idea. Just so long as you remember what made the previous game so good. You know, if that gap is large enough, it's not entirely, impossible that you may have forgotten.
For what felt like forever, Mirror's Edge was one of those games that everyone held up as needing a sequel, because when that game came out in 2008, there wasn't a lot else like it. A first-person parkour platformer adventure with a sprinkling of combat and a uniquely striking art style that all come together to create pretty much the most original thing that DICE have ever put their name to. Apart from Shrek on the Xbox, but that's a goddamn masterpiece. But yeah, that's the sort of game that's going to generate a fanbase without breaking a sweat, and of course, those people are going to want a sequel or some kind of follow-up in the future. Eventually, EA caught on that people wanted something that would earn them lots of money if they did it right, and so put the right pieces in place to create Mirror's Edge Catalyst, which aimed to be less of a sequel or a follow-up and more of a complete cleaning of the slate. Which is weird because, I'd take a sequel. Do you really need to reboot anything? Well, that's the golden question, and the most important angle to approach Mirror's Edge Catalyst from, because I don't think any major fan of the first game would have complained if Catalyst was little more than a modern update on an 8-year-old video game. You know, this game wasn't perfect, but a lot of it works well when combined together as part of the whole package, and you should probably just aim to replicate that if you are desperate to reboot the IP and create a new, reliable franchise full of sequels. What actually happened is that EA muddied the water too much with changes, and for every good addition like open world exploration, we've got bad ones like a completely rewritten story that gives Faith a new origin that is less believable and more, hey, Blade Runner was cool, let's just do that. And the combat, which wasn't exactly amazing in the original, is now considerably worse, with AI that hurts my eyes to look at. What the fuck are you guys doing? Also, they changed Faith's voice actress and she sounds really disinterested by everything in the game. It's really good at taking me out of the moment.
No, there's someone else here. Doesn't look like a runner.
Faith, just get out of there.
Sorry, but I'm gonna check it out.
Of course you are.
You know, I reckon if Mirror's Edge was more of a rough cult classic, Catalyst would have gotten away with this, but the first game has held up pretty well all these years later, and fast forward another 10, and I don't think anyone's gonna remember Catalyst too fondly by comparison. Why play a worse version of an older game? Don't worry, the next one will have microtransactions in it. Reboots are basically committed reactions. Someone higher up decided that a game franchise needed a shake-up, and so put their money where their mouth is and greenlit a project that would hopefully appeal to demographics that are otherwise missing out. This is the perceived logic behind most reboots if it isn't just a publicity stunt to upset the established fans and seek out some new ones, because that's the impression I and many others got from Devil May Cry's reboot when that was announced in late 2010. It seemed like a fast turnaround considering that Devil May Cry 4 only came out 2 years prior, and so it came to be when DMC Devil May Cry rebooted the franchise in 2013 by burning most of it to the ground. I mean, you can definitely blur your eyes and pretend that you're playing a traditional Devil May Cry game made by the same guys as before, but as soon as you start focusing in on any of the details behind it, the more the cracks start to show. Can a game be good but also terrible for its own franchise that it basically disowns anyway? Find out on the next episode of Capcom Do the Darndest Things.
DMC Devil May Cry was so provocative at an early stage that it felt like Capcom were reacting to Dante being almost a little bit too lovable. Because he is a lot of fun to watch, and he was fresh off his most entertaining performance in DMC 4, and it would have been so easy to continue down this road of a new game. Instead, they got Ninja Theory involved to make a new Devil May Cry game for a completely different demographic. Were we just wasting time before then?
Capcom deciding to change everything with Devil May Cry makes even less sense when you remember that DMC 4 sold pretty well and brought back some glowing praise too, so clearly this was less of a knee-jerk reaction to save face amidst an onslaught of backlash, and instead a pre-established plan to drive up sales numbers even further. That's pretty much all it boils down to really. Devil May Cry was doing quite well for sales, but Capcom were getting jealous of other franchises that were doing incredibly well with a slightly younger demographic, and wanted a reboot that appealed to a Western audience of that age. What we got is a game that functions quite well on its own, but is almost embarrassed of its roots and does everything in its power to pretend that those other games don't exist. Dante is here, but he's more cynical and angry at the world than his more carefree namesake, and I'm not sure if that's meant to reflect what Capcom think their young teenage demographic would connect with, or if this new Dante was designed this way as a complete departure from OG Dante as possible, but it's stupid either way. Again, it's not a bad game on its own, but it's let down when you introduce an ounce of context into the mix. And clearly it didn't quite resonate as strongly as Capcom would have liked, with DMC failing to match DMC 4 for sales, and so they reverted back to type with DMC 5, and hey, would you look at that! People like funny Dante more than angry Dante. You're making it sound like rocket science. So, if you picked up one thing from me talking about Devil May Cry, hopefully it'll be that a bad reboot isn't automatically a bad video game. You can make changes that fly in the face of what fans of the series are used to, but if those changes are implemented somewhat well, you're likely to get some decent review scores, if not any kind of love from the fan side of Metacritic. I'm only reinforcing this now because it's that time of the week where I talk about Sonic, and you can't talk about reboots that never got far off the ground without talking about how many times Sega have tried to lead their flagship Hedgehog in a daring new direction. I get why, because he's a creation of the 90s, and much like The Simpsons with the 80s, it's hard work keeping something relevant when it's so far displaced from its comfort zone. The problem hasn't so much been the rebooting, but the circumstances surrounding the reboot, which have left them fighting a losing battle. And few games lost as badly as Sonic 06. This is why we need a distinction between bad games and bad reboots, because as a game, Sonic 06 is all sorts of terrible and so awful that I often can't believe that this thing exists with a recognizable mascot on the front cover, but as a reboot, it's not quite as bad. Don't get me wrong, it's still shockingly bad, but I can at least admire that Sega didn't just want to create Sonic Adventure 3, and instead used the next generation of consoles to make Sonic more realistic. That's also a big problem though, because Sonic doesn't really mesh well with realistic graphics or a story that delves into some unnecessarily strange areas that I still don't fully understand all these years later. Sonic 06 infamously struggled with a condensed work schedule because it was rushed out for Sonic's 15th anniversary, but I've maintained for a while that conceptually, this reboot was so misguided that no amount of development would have saved it. As a stepping on point for potentially a whole new wave of Sonic games, it was doomed from the start. Sega keep trying to reboot Sonic and it keeps going wrong, so maybe they need to consolidate what they have and stop starting from scratch every time. You can find tiny glimmers of light in games as terrible as this, you just have to look hard for them. I'm sure they can overwork someone to do that for them. Reinventing classic franchises for a more modern reboot is such a gamble. Don't get me wrong, it's perfectly doable if you make sweeping changes with half an eye on the basic essence of the franchise and ensure that nothing of value is being left behind, and games like Resident Evil 7 and Doom are masterclasses in respectful reboots, but not every franchise is treated with the right amount of respect. Alone in the Dark is even more important to horror games than Resident Evil, and yet whereas Resident Evil has slowly shaved off any protruding edges over the years, Alone in the Dark as a franchise has basically gotten worse with every new game. It depends how you feel about the first one and if you can buy into a world where clunky often equals scary, but there's no denying that the last two Alone in the Dark games have been fucking horrible. No, seriously, 2008's Alone in the Dark is a collection of terrible ideas pretending to be a video game, and 2015's Illumination is honest to God one of the worst multiplayer games I've ever played. For a brief time in 2015, inviting someone to play this with you was like giving someone front row seats to your colonic irrigation. We're not talking about that one though, because Illumination definitely wasn't a reboot, but that one from 2008 with the manual blinking? Oh yeah, now we're talking.
Technically, 2008's Alone in the Dark isn't even the first reboot in this franchise, since The New Nightmare came out 7 years prior, and it does some new things, and it really wants to be the start of something new, but no, like 2008's iteration is a whole different flavour of terrible, with so many misguided ideas that feel entirely divorced from the source material from the original game that, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but only if these new ideas are, you know, not shit.
I want to say that 2008's Alone in the Dark has my respect for trying to do some interesting things with how fire spreads and how you patch up injuries and blinking, but it's hard for me to have any respect for a game that ends up feeling like a ridiculous roller coaster ride from one idea to the next without any development in between. As far as reboots go, this is death by 1,000 shitty ideas, where the devs didn't really know what kind of game they wanted to make, so they just crammed everything onto one disc and hoped that something would land with people. It kinda doesn't with me, and it's quite hard to appreciate this game for anything it does deliberately, since there's some value to be had in laughing at the goofy graphics or the car chase near the end or being the fucking universe! But this is not the kind of game you want to be making if you have any aspirations of starting a new franchise. There's way too much going on here for me to think that this game deserves to be called Alone in the Dark. I am definitely not alone, and while it is dark in places, it's not really angling for any kind of horror. It's just a whole bunch of loudly wasting my time. Stick to the manual blinking, I guess. It is a lot of fun to look back on these games with some hefty hindsight and bask in the afterglow of their failures. It's some spectacularly bad decision making that we can look back on and just be so confused that someone would do this with a recognised property, and when you start thinking like that, we simply can't ignore the crazy drugs that Hudson Soft must have been smoking when they were deciding what to do with Bomberman in the mid-2000s. You know Bomberman, right? He's not as popular these days as he was in the past, partially because of the 7-year hiatus he had before Super Bomberman R, but at the peak of his popularity, he was a lovable Konami mascot who shed a more cartoony light on dooming your friends to death with explosives. It's wonderful stuff, and such a unique concept for a game that can carry itself for many years, but clearly something that needs painting with a coat of gritty realism. Oh, don't you see? The Bombermen are kept in some kind of stasis until it's time to be armoured up and deployed into a nightmarish maze full of fire to duke it out for the world's last remaining resources. Yeah, just like I remember it. I don't know what this is. I definitely don't know why this is, which admittedly puts me in a bit of a bind when it comes to being the explainy video man I pretend to be, but I've got some basic knowledge. Guess I'll give it a go. Bomberman Act 0 may look like a traditional Bomberman game given that the gameplay hasn't changed that much, but I draw the line at unnecessary realism invading its way into the usually colourful world of Bomberman without actually adding anything other than a more challenging visual appeal. What was the plan here? It's not like this design change was in pursuit of a radically different demographic, since Act 0 isn't any more violent than standard Bomberman games, and the ESRB slapped a teen rating to underline how little the visuals mattered. This isn't your hard R or M for mature, it's just kind of, you know, more true to life, potentially? No? It's such a weird game because it still plays like Bomberman, albeit a rushed, watered-down version, but it looks like some horrible imitation or a self-aware minigame that you'd find in something like Halo or Dead Space. However, the underlying point that I keep coming back to is that Hudson Soft could never expect to have the franchise rebooted by this, which calls into question its role as a reboot. But you're telling me that Konami wouldn't have tried to turn this into a whole spin-off franchise if, in some strange parallel universe, people were completely on board with all of this? I don't completely understand what Act 0 was supposed to be, but it is bad at being a video game and just the worst at being a reboot. Anyone want a gritty Mario reboot while we're here?
It is that ridiculous though, because Bomberman had about 20 years of games behind it before Act 0 came along and did its own completely terrible thing. Just goes to show that no franchise is ever truly safe. This is RabbidLuigi, and if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe for more in the future, and if you want to watch one right now, there's one here about surprise boss fights. I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including the Green Scorpion, Scott Riker, and Devon Hutt. Thank you for watching, and please make games less realistic.